Hello, I'm Peter Freeth, and I'm going to be sharing with you some ideas about understanding language with NLP, and in particular how you can understand and use quotes and stories in your work. Now, you remember Milton model. It's the model of language within NLP that's about influencing someone else's map of reality. And that doesn't mean getting them to accept ideas or think things which are totally new. It doesn't mean manipulating them. It means talking to them in a way which you intentionally leave gaps in your language, so that they will then fill in those gaps from their specific life experiences, and therefore whatever you're saying to them will take on more relevance to them. And as I said, we can't use it to manipulate people or get them to think things that they weren't already thinking, but it's getting them to accept ideas or to consider ideas by relating them to their own personal experiences. So, for example, if I remind you about the last time that you felt really fascinated and engaged and interested in something, to the point that you almost forgot what was going on around you, then you'll probably remember a specific instance without me having to know what that is. So we can now have a much more specific conversation without you having to tell me what that instance or what that particular memory or recollection is. And as you can appreciate, sometimes when you're doing coaching or therapeutic work with people, you want to relate to experiences which they don't necessarily want to talk about, and so it's very useful to allow us to do that. And in NLP, and there's an old idea which NLP recycles, which is that the map is not the territory. We have an experience of life which has far too much information in it to relate to directly, and so we simplify our life experiences by deleting, distorting and generalizing information. So if you think about the last holiday that you had, let's say it was a week or 2 weeks, when you got back to work, how long did you spend telling your colleagues or your friends about your holiday? You didn't describe it in real time, you missed things out. Most importantly, the things that you missed out were consistent for you, and the things that you emphasized were consistent for you. So every story that you tell about a nice weekend that you've had, or a holiday that you've had, or somewhere that you've been that was interesting, will follow the same pattern of deletions, distortions and generalizations. When we relate to our experiences, we miss out a lot of detail and we act as if our map is complete, but it isn't. We'll describe an experience in a very limited way, in a very narrow way, with those deletions, distortions and generalizations that I mentioned. And we'll act as if the bit that we tell people about is the whole experience, but it isn't. There are significant gaps in it. So with Milton model, instead of doing that by accident, because that's the story that we want to tell, we do it with purpose and intention, because of our intention to help or support or guide the person that we're working with. So we leave out some information so that the person can fill in the gaps from their own experience of reality. And when I say leave out information, I don't mean huge chunks of content that are missing, but just in the gaps in the language that we use. So if I say I went for a run, I don't tell you where I went for a run, I don't tell you how I ran, I don't tell you where I was or what I was wearing. But in order for you to imagine me running, you put that information into the picture from your own experience. So how it works is very subtle. So let's talk about quotes and stories. And let's start by defining what a story is. It's any account of events that are happening either not here, or not now, or not to you. So imagine two people are talking in a room somewhere, sharing stories. It's now, but it's not here, and it's not us. Imagine that two people were talking in this very room earlier today, sharing stories. So it's here, but it's not us, and it's not now. You know, I really enjoyed the last time we were together in this room sharing stories. It's us, and it's here, but it's not now. So from an early age, we learn to defend our map of reality by developing a critical filter, and it protects us from believing everything we're told, and it also keeps out new information. What it's there for is that from an early age, we develop an abstract map of reality, and our very sense of self depends on that map of reality being consistent and consistent over time. So we don't want anybody else telling us that the world isn't how we think it is, because that would make us feel very unsettled and insecure. And if you've ever had the experience of believing something very strongly, maybe about a person, and then finding out that your beliefs were not supported, or that that person was not what you thought they were, it's a very unsettling experience. So this critical filter serves a very useful purpose. However, it also keeps out new information. And it means that our map of reality is always out of date. And if we can't update our maps, we can't navigate. The critical filter stops other people from influencing our maps, or so we like to think. Because actually there are two simple forms of communication which bypass the critical filter. What do you think they might be? So can you think of someone you know who seems to be influential or a good public speaker? What do? They probably use both of these two very simple forms of communication, which are questions and stories. So how do they work? Quickly look at questions first. If I make a statement such as the sky is orange, you will agree or disagree with it. You might look out the window, you might think, oh, the sky's blue. You might think that even if it's night time, or even if it's dawn or sunset. But if I ask you a question, is the sky orange? Notice the effect that it has. Notice what comes into your mind. Notice where your focus of attention goes. So if I say the Prime Minister is a good person, you might agree or disagree with that. But if I ask you a question, is the Prime Minister a good person? Notice what happens to your focus of attention. How good is the Prime Minister? What do you feel the Prime Minister is good at? Notice how these questions direct your focus of attention. Notice how there are certain realities that you have to create or anticipate or expect just in order to make sense of what the question means. So a question always contains a presupposition. What must be true for the question to make sense? So the question, is the sky orange, presupposes that orange is a quality which can be applied to the sky. Otherwise the question makes no sense. If I ask, is the sky comfortable? Is the sky happy? Doesn't make any sense. In NLP meta model, we call that a selection or restriction violation. We're taking a quality and we're applying it to something that logically can't have that quality. So every question is a loaded question. Every question carries a payload. It's the presupposition behind the question, which is temporarily accepted as true so that the person could understand the question. But when it becomes temporarily true, just long enough to understand the question, it becomes possible. And if it becomes possible, it can become true. And through this mechanism by which we understand language, the presupposition becomes reality. So this morning on my way here, a man stopped me and said that the sky's orange and their best friend is a good person. And I said that I didn't agree with him. And he said, well, that's okay. You don't have to agree with me, just as long as you know it's how I feel. And I could certainly respect him for that. So a story makes no immediate sense because it's not about you, and therefore you have no need to protect yourself from its contents. And in order to make sense of a story, you put yourself in it. So did you imagine yourself in the street talking to that man? Where was it? What colour was the sky? What did the man look like? And who's your best friend? A story's not about you, so you don't block it. You then make the story about you, and the presuppositions in the story become true. So good stories contain a character you can identify with, a situation that you can relate to, and an outcome that you might desire. Now, a quote is simply a short story. It's a statement that's attributed to somebody else. Now, sharks live for 200 years. You may or may not believe that. Did you know that sharks live for 200 years? My friend told me that sharks live for 200 years. So compare those three statements and notice how you interact with each of those. Notice how each of those makes you feel differently, makes you react differently, because they're interacting with that critical filter differently. I'll read them again for you. Sharks live for 200 years. Do you know that sharks live for 200 years? My friend told me that sharks live for 200 years. Notice the difference between them. So maybe when I said sharks live for 200 years, you said, no, they don't, I don't believe you. You disputed the validity of the statement itself. It was a direct statement and you disputed it. Do you know that sharks live for 200 years? Maybe you questioned not the validity of the information, but the knowledge. Really? Are you sure? My friend told me that sharks live for 200 years. Maybe you questioned the authority of the friend. How does he know? Is he an expert on sharks? But what you probably didn't do would disagree directly with the assertion that sharks live for 200 years. And I predict in the next half an hour you're going to Google that and check it out on Wikipedia. So, in summary, language represents our experience of life, and with Milton model we can use fragments of language to create a rich personal experience, and stories and quotes allow us to share those experiences with other people. Stories are not about us, so we don't reject them, but to understand we make them about us, putting ourselves in the story, and quotes are the simplest form of a story. Your success as a public speaker depends on your ability as a storyteller, and as a storyteller, you take your audience with you on a journey that is uniquely personalised to each one of them. Thank you very much for listening.